I'm Dan Curtis with Nomad Capitalist, and today we're talking with Michael Jensen and Brent Hartinger. They are a husband team of nomad authors who travel the world recording their experiences. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, Dan. Thank you for having us. Hello.
Thanks for being here. So in 2017, I understand you packed up from the US and decided to go out on this broad global journey. Tell me what precipitated that.
Well, I think we had always talked about traveling at some point in the future, but at some point has a way of staying in the future. It actually, the time we made the decision was the night of the election, 2016. We were at a very depressing election party. We're Democrats. We were not happy with results. We were driving home, and I turned to Michael and I said, "What do you think we leave the country, sell our house, leave the country, travel the world?" And I've lived overseas before, and we've both always been interested in traveling, but I especially had always been wanting to do that. So the minute he said that, it took me about 2 seconds to consider it. It was like, if you're serious, I'm in. And it took us, we had to, my father is elderly, we had to help him with his living situation. We spent most of the next year getting ready, and then we just left at the end of 2017. I think a lot of our friends thought we were just blowing off steam after the election. After every election, people on either side were saying, "I'm going to get out of the country and go." I think our friends thought, "You guys are blowing off steam a little bit." But 6 weeks later, we'd sold our house and moved into an apartment. We got our lives online.
That's a bold move. And so for the last, 5 years now, you've been traveling.
Yeah, full time. 5th year, full time, and people ask us, "Are you thinking about stopping?" And we always think, no, not anytime soon. I mean, at this point, it feels like we could keep going until we die. I mean, we're having a ball.
Sure. So, and tell me a little bit about, I know your background, but tell our viewers a little bit about your background. What allows you to travel like this?
Well, we're both writers. We've been writers most of our adult lives. Brent writes novels and screenplays and plays. I write historical fiction. I've done editing work, and we're now writing a travel newsletter about our travels. So we were living in Seattle, as Brent always says, one of the most expensive cities in the United States, but we weren't benefiting from those high-tech jobs there. We were just making our living as writers, which is not a great way to get rich. So we have writing jobs that we can do online and go anywhere we want. So that's how we're able to do it. Kind of feels stupid that we didn't do this earlier, given that we were not benefiting from the Seattle economy and our income was the same, and it is the same wherever we live. And our cost of living has been so much cheaper. When we left Seattle, I'm kind of the money guy in our relationship, and I was like, I hope we can keep our costs the same of what they were in Seattle. And the reality is that it has turned out to be about 50% of the cost of what we were spending in Seattle. I don't know what life would be like in Seattle now. I will say, we're not expats, we're nomads, we're digital nomads, which means we are sort of continuously on the move. We are not even necessarily looking to ever settle down at any point in the future. We stay in different countries, generally between 1 and 3 months, and then we move on. That's what we've been doing for 5 years.
Well, and you're in a bit of a unique situation in that you're traveling as an openly gay couple. Tell me about the challenges. What are there any challenges?
When we first left, we were definitely concerned about that. We weren't worried when we were going to be living in countries like Italy, where we're currently at now, or the United Kingdom. But we did worry about venturing outside of those Western European countries. And our first year, we actually wound up having to do that. We wound up having to go to Bulgaria. And, Bulgaria doesn't have the greatest reputation in terms of gay rights. So we did some research and we talked to some folks and we decided to go ahead and go. And much to our surprise, it's basically been a non-issue. It was a non-issue there. It's been a non-issue pretty much everywhere we've gone. That being said, you do need to do your due diligence. You do need to understand the local mores and customs when you're living in Istanbul, Turkey. You're not going to walk down the street holding hands and acting like an out gay couple in Miami. I mean, the big takeaway is that the world is generally a live and let live kind of place, at least for people like us who are white Westerners perceived to be wealthy. It is in the interest in these countries to treat us well because they perceive us as rich Americans, perceive us to be rich Americans. So they're not going to make waves. How they treat their local citizens is different than how they would treat us. But I also think it is true that if you are respectful of local customs, if you are relatively discreet, I hate that word, but if you are mindful, if you read the room, and if you remember that when you travel, you are a guest in other people's countries,
and you should act like a guest. You should read the room. You should pay attention. You should respect them. If you respect them, they will generally respect you. I mean, issues do come up. People often assume we're brothers or twins. I don't think we look anything alike. But the way I explain that is, people are looking for sort of a peg to hang us on. We're two people who are comfortable together. We're traveling together. What could you be? Well, I guess you could be brothers. You seem like you are comfortable with each other. But sometimes we confuse people. We don't always lead with the information that we're a gay couple. But on the other hand, we're not going to deny who we are. We believe in our own personal dignity. Personal safety is the most important issue.
We never ask for separate beds or anything like that. I mean, our profile, you're going to see we're a gay couple. I want to add one word about the word discreet. And that can have a really negative connotation. But I think the thing to remember is when you're visiting a country like Turkey, everybody is discreet about their personal lives. Most people are not walking down the street holding hands. So I don't want people to hear that and think, oh, I'm not going to a country where I have to be discreet because I'm being treated differently.
As generally, though, the pattern is when we meet somebody, whether it's our landlord or Michael got to know the baker next to our apartment in Istanbul, we get to know them, and then we would tell them that we're gay like later into the process. We wouldn't necessarily begin with that. And 100% of the time so far, it has been tolerance, some degree of between acceptance and tolerance. We haven't really gotten, sometimes we get confusion, but we haven't gotten anything really negative. Then again, we're sort of conventionally masculine. We're perceived to be rich white Americans, and so we realize we have it better than maybe some other people.
And a lot of what you're describing seems to be common sense. I mean, I wouldn't put those attributes to an openly gay couple more than I would put them to anybody that walks down the street in Istanbul. You practice a certain amount of personal discretion and a personal amount of common sense, it seems.
I also think, we read these news stories or we see things and we think, oh gosh, that must happen all the time. And the reality is, it's a news story for a reason. It was something really exceptional in a particular country. That doesn't mean every gay person is being beat up. That said, there are certain countries we wouldn't go to. We probably would never go to Saudi Arabia. There are countries we wouldn't go or couldn't go to. And so, you need, as Michael said, you need to do your due diligence and be mindful of these things.
Well, and I, speaking of countries you've been to, I noticed you spent some time in Tbilisi, Georgia. We have a large contingent of viewers in Georgia. I actually have personally spent quite a bit of time in Tbilisi. What were your impressions of the city?
Well, starting with the gay topic, we were there when there were issues going on with Tbilisi Gay Pride, and we got to know the founders of Tbilisi Pride. And one of the things we do, we don't just go into these countries. Tbilisi is not the most tolerant country when it comes to LGBTQ folks. And so when we go into these countries, we do try and get involved with the local community and do what we can to support those folks. So we've written about Tbilisi Pride. We've written about those issues. That one negative part aside, which never impacted us while we were there, we love Tbilisi. I mean, we thought the city was great. We thought the food was amazing. The history was fantastic, and we love the people.
Yeah, we absolutely. It's one of our favorite cities. Tbilisi is one of our favorite cities, and I do think Georgian cuisine is going to be world famous one of these years, and that's going to make me sad because it was such a pleasant discovery. The Thinkali dumplings that are it's so good. They're served with a dipping sauce. I mean, the broth is sort of cooked within the dough, and all those sauces. We were out to dinner one night. We had all these great meals, with the roasted meats and the nutty sauces and the stewed vegetables. And I'm thinking that it was like some sort of European ethnic cuisine. It tasted a little Turkish, tasted a little Greek. And I'm thinking, this is really good, and these are really good restaurants, but why don't we get authentic Georgian food one night? And our dining guest said to me, well, we've been eating authentic Georgian food.
That's what it is, yeah.
It's a very sophisticated cuisine. It tastes really complicated and wonderful, and we love that.
Yeah, I could live on Kinkali. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, I mean, you talked about some pleasant places. Where else have you been that you would recommend?
We really loved
Gosh.
Mexico City. We like Mexico a lot. We love Mexico City, and I think because it's on our continent, we sort of ignored it, and we didn't know that there's this fantastic, world-class, wonderful, endlessly fascinating city, just south of the United States. We loved Vietnam. We were there for 3 months. We liked Thailand. We love Switzerland. We love Italy. We keep coming back to Italy. Right now we're in the Cinque Terre. We were just at Lake Como. We spent most of this year in Eastern Europe. So we were in Romania, Bulgaria, Czechia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia, North Macedonia. Wonderful part of the world.
Over the past 5 years, we've lived in 20 plus different countries, and
Wow.
we've visited somewhat over 50 total. And I don't know if we're incredibly lucky or we're easygoing, but we've really only had one destination where we didn't love something about it. Almost every place has something, whether it's the people, whether it's the nature, whether it's the history that you fall in love with. So we just have had amazing experiences almost everywhere we've gone.
We sort of gravitated to the pattern where the big cities, like London or Rome, we'll be there for a week or so to do the big tourist things, and then we'll sort of live in sort of the second tier places. That's not always true. I mean, we're going to spend 2 months in London next month. But we have found that if you get just a little bit off the beaten path, first of all, you don't have the problem with over tourism. The tourists disappear. But also there are all these fabulous places that are not famous, but you feel like they should be famous, like they could be famous. They just are not yet. They haven't really been discovered yet. There's so many beautiful parts of the world. The famous parts, sometimes they're underwhelming and sometimes they live up to expectations. But what we're really enjoying is that sort of sense of discovery, going places that we didn't really have a clear picture of in our mind, and we end up being pleasantly surprised by so many different aspects.
And can I ask, does that carry over into your work, into your writing?
It has been, I think back about sort of my writing. I write fiction, and I think about my writing pre-nomading, and I think, what did I write about? My life was so boring. I just sat at my computer all day, and now I'm endlessly exploring the world. Absolutely. It feels like I have more things to write about than I will ever write. And unfortunately, my perspective, the more time I spent out of America, the less American my perspective. I look at America and I think, oh my gosh, that country is crazy. And America seems like such an outlier compared to the rest of the world in so many different ways. And yet, of course, I have to write for Americans. That's most of my audience. So it's a little, discombobulating.
Well, and it's so influenced us. We so enjoyed writing about our travels that we started a newsletter. We've got a newsletter, Substack newsletter called Brent and Michael Going Places that it's funny, when we started doing the newsletter, we thought, we're probably going to run out of things to talk about here, within a couple months. And we have a list that's impossibly long of things that we could talk about.
Yeah, there's always something to write about.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, yeah, just personally, I never thought I'd say that I need to escape to Georgia or Serbia in order to get a more sane lifestyle. But that's kind of my case as well. It's been an enlightening experience traveling this much.
It clarifies what we like about America, but also what we don't like about America. And in the end, you divvy up the different numbers, and for us, the minuses still outweigh the pluses. There are things I still do admire about America, but I don't like the American lifestyle. I don't like the car-based lifestyle. I don't like the pace of life. I don't like the food, frankly. The food is so much better. And frankly, the cost of living is so much cheaper the way we're living now. It's so much cheaper. We'll go back to the United States and eat at a restaurant, and I'm like, oh my God, this hamburger is $30, and you start to think of a nice meal out as costing, $20 or $30 for the whole meal, and then you go back and it's $200 for a meal. It just seems crazy.
It can. Yeah, I agree. I live it. So this sounds like a plug for somebody that would want to kind of replicate your journey, but are these the reasons you would give for somebody becoming a nomad?
It's a very specific lifestyle, and I don't think you would know if it's right for you until you do it, but it's sure right for us. People say, well, isn't it stressful constantly moving like that? And I find it much less stressful than owning and maintaining a house in the United States and just dealing with the pace of the United States. The pace of life is so much easier. Cost of living for Americans or Western Europeans is so much lower. Honestly, it's the social aspect I think that we like the best. You know, in America, everybody's so busy. They don't have the cafe culture, the coffee culture. In most of the rest of the world, cities revolve around people and talking and meals and sharing conversation. And that isn't true in America. It just dramatically is not true, even in sort of the urban areas.
The other question we get about constantly traveling is, don't you miss having a sense of home? And the fact of the matter is we don't feel that way at all. We call ourselves slow max, so we tend to stay in a place between 1 and 3 months long. And pretty much every time we get there, by the end of that first week, we're feeling very much at home. And that's partly because we've learned how to find the things that we are going to enjoy: a local park to work out, grocery stores to shop at, places we like to walk. And we do recognize that because there's two of us and we're traveling together, you know, we sort of always carry that sense of home with us. But no, we don't get homesick. I don't ever feel rootless, because the world is so big and interesting that I'm just always finding something new to be part of. And the other thing people ask about is stuff, materialistic stuff. We each have one big backpack and a small backpack. And when we left the United States, we did not consider ourselves materialistic, but I was shocked by how much stuff we had in our house. And now that we're forced to live with just our backpacks, I don't even know what it was that we used to have, because I miss nothing. I don't miss any of those things. I feel like I've traded possessions for experiences, and the experiences are 1,000 times more valuable than whatever stuff we used to have.
It's not just not missing it. There is such a purity. And I used to hear people so sick like this, and I just thought they were so crazy. But there is just, the simplicity is just so wonderful. Everything is so simple and easy. You know, we don't have all this stuff to keep track of, and there's a real beauty in that. I will also say, we sort of seamlessly plugged ourselves into the nomad and expat community, and so now there is this community of people all over the world who are doing what we do, and we know many of them now, and we rendezvous in different cities. And then, of course, when we are outside of the tourist areas, the locals are so curious about America. They're curious about our lives. It's very easy to get to know locals. So we've been welcomed into their homes too. And so between the two things, we feel like we have a much more active social life. We do have a much more active social life than we ever did back in Seattle. And I think it's partly America, it's partly the experience of nomading, but it's been wonderful.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like you don't even miss Starbucks. I get. Have you ever thought about getting a second citizenship or a second residency, or do you travel too much?
We're working on it. You know, there are different options. You know, golden visa. Honestly, though, this sounds terrible, but right now we kind of have the best of both worlds, and because of the foreign earned income tax exclusion, we don't pay income taxes in America. As long as we don't stay in any one country more than 180 days, we don't have a tax event in the different countries either. So we're kind of living, you know, we pay payroll taxes, but we don't pay income taxes. So if and when we ever do stop somewhere, we're going to be mindful of the tax situation. But it's kind of nice to not have to worry about that, right?
It is, but we have decided that for a variety of reasons, we're probably never going to move back to the United States, you know, except to visit. So as we do travel, we do look at each destination with the possibility of not so much the mechanics of can we get residency here, but starting with, how do I feel about here? Is this the sort of place where I could see myself settling down? And we love our lives right now, so we're not looking to do that. But we are aware that, you know, we're in our 50s. At some point, you know, health issues will probably force us to settle down. So we will eventually choose one of these countries to get either residency or a second citizenship.
There's a lot to consider, though. You know, you want a stable government, you want a relatively low tax rate, you want a tolerant society,
Good healthcare system.
You want a good healthcare system, you want some sort of expat community, you want to just like the culture, you want to be accepted. There's a lot to consider.
But honestly, the world has been so changeable since we left that
Yeah.
we have occasionally talked about buying property in different places, but I'm always especially concerned about, well, it seems fine today. What's it going to be like a year from now? Is Russia going to invade Ukraine? Are forest fires in Seattle or the forest fires in the Pacific Northwest going to make Seattle much less pleasant than it is now. And right now, we have the ability to just keep moving. It's like, that place isn't going very well, we're out of here.
It's also nice. I mean, you know, we are writers, we're artists, which means our income is very inconsistent. It's up and down. And it's nice to have the flexibility that if a project doesn't work, oh, that I spent a year working on this book, it didn't sell. Well, we have the option to move to a cheaper part of the world. And if conversely, we have a good year, oh, we can go to this country that's maybe more expensive. It's nice to have that flexibility and that freedom.
Well, and you had touched on the world changes. I mean, obviously nothing is static in this world. Have you personally seen the world become more or less accepting as you've traveled?
Accepting in what sense?
Just accepting of lifestyle choices, of political choices, of some of the things that honestly made you leave the U.S. Have you found a global trend of any kind?
There are absolutely two forces in the world. Like they say, America is a 50-50 country right now. I think the world is a 50-50 world. There are two forces, you know, I mean, the force of sort of moderation and tolerance, and then it does knock up against forces of nationalism and more traditional beliefs. And we see evidence of that everywhere we go, but we see evidence for both. You know, sometimes whenever I'm depressed, we'll have a negative experience. We were tear gassed in Istanbul during Gay Pride, you know, the very oppressive government there. And these people who are celebrating, you know, it's a political movement, it's a political protest there. And the hundreds of people who turn out are my absolute heroes. They just are so brave, to my mind. But so you have those two forces colliding in a very real way. You know, they stay off the main, they don't announce it in advance, they stay off the main roads and they stay on the cobblestone side streets because they know that if it's announced, the police will come in with the water guns and blast them, but they can't bring the water guns onto the cobblestones. And so, you know, I do think, I mean, this has made me generally more optimistic about the future and about the planet because we've met so many wonderful people, so many hospitable people, so many great cultures, even if they're not necessarily cultures that I would, you know, that I would choose, you know, mores that I would choose to follow in my personal life. I still understand, oh, this is a valid way to live, you know? And we spend a lot of time in Muslim countries. I have come to think, wow, this is a really beautiful religion. There is a dark side and a light side like every religion, but there's a lot of beauty here too. Mostly I feel it has made me feel better about the future in the world.
There is a privilege that comes with leaving your home country. I mean, part of the reason we left the United States is because how things were going politically. And that year running up to the election, I think was stressful for everybody on every side. And I know by the time we left, I was like a knot of just anger and frustration and wanted out. And we are not naive enough. We've lived in Hungary, we've lived in Istanbul, we've lived in countries, here in Italy, they just elected a fascist president. And while we are aware of those things, they don't feel nearly as personal as it did living in the United States. In the United States, watching the two sides go at each other and watching cultural norms we'd accepted for a long time decay was very stressful. You know, in Hungary, we saw the campaign that was going on. I knew the negative things, but it was much easier to disconnect from that, which is a inherently selfish thing to do. I mean, we write about those things, we try and affect them the way we can, but we're in our 50s. We're part of the gay rights movement, you know, our entire lives. We've done a lot of work in that arena and just politics in general. And we still write about those things, but it is nice as a nomad to be able to have the distance of Europe and the Atlantic Ocean between us and what's going on there and not get absorbed in what's going on here. So that is one of the nice parts of the way we live without completely, you know, giving up our responsibility to be part of the world.
It is occasionally though.
Yeah. Sorry.
Occasionally though, I mean, we spent much of this year in the Balkans, and it is a reminder, you know, so many people in the United States, I think they take peace and stability, they take it for granted, and they don't understand what comes after that going away. You know, when people really start to hate each other on a deep-seated level. And we've seen and talked to people who lived through wars and, you know, had relatives shot and killed and shot themselves. And it just, Americans have like we have privilege and luxury, Americans have the privilege and luxury to say what sounds to me like really stupid things, like, oh, we should just have a civil war. You know, we should just divide into two countries. And having seen countries that literally did that, and that 30 years later, they're still picking up the pieces, I'm thinking, no, you want to do whatever you can to avoid that, because that's like the worst possible thing that can happen to a country.
Well, Michael and Brent, it's been a pleasure listening to your story. It sounds like you have an amazing journey. Can you tell us where we can find you and where we can follow along with your journey?
A lot of different places. We're very available. Our Substack newsletter is our primary outlet. It's Brent and Michael are going places. Just Google that in Substack and you'll find us. We're on Facebook a lot. We've got an Instagram account. We do Twitter. Message us on Facebook, and we're happy to respond. We love talking to people and sharing, what we've done and answering people's questions.
Well, be careful what you ask for. Yeah, be careful what you ask for. You might very well get some questions out of this one. But
honestly, we love what we do, and we love talking about it. So don't be shy if you've got a question.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the time and absolutely appreciate the story.
Well, thank you for having us, Dan. We appreciate it.
Thank you.